Oh, oh, everything keeps moving on me here.
Can someone send me the one that says the calendar invite?
Mayor Gibson, I just forwarded Council President Fender the Outlook invite already.
Oh, okay, good, thank you.
Okay. And bear with me here. I see.
Metro Councilor Gonzalez has his hand up. Stephen.
All right. Okay. Let's see. Councilor Gonzalez.
Mayor Bubenik, that is a huge Christmas tree. The balls are the size of your head.
You know, someone has to have a better tree than Pete. Come on.
Right. And let's see. Councilor President Rosner, are you going to be sitting in today for Mayor Mays?
Mayor Mays
Hey, I'm here.
The mayor's here.
Oh, there you
let
are.
me in already, young man.
Ah, okay. Somebody else did it. It wasn't me. All right.
Who's managing this terrible tragedy of what was that show? Was it something Squares that had all the funny people, or they thought they were funny in it?
Hollywood Squares.
Ah,
Yeah,
I'm
so
dating
if
myself.
we're doing that, I want to be Charlie Weaver, okay?
Okay. All right.
I apologize. This hasn't happened before.
Yep. Okay. All right. So
What happened?
Year and a half of Zoom, and now we're getting our backsides kicked by it.
That's right. Okay, we now have a quorum. We'll continue watching the attendees list to see if there's anyone else that we need to promote up. But I think we're ready to get going, Chair.
Yeah.
Awesome. Welcome everyone to the December 13th meeting of the Washington County Coordinating Committee. Stephen, do we have any visitor comments?
We did not have anyone who signed up to provide comment, but if there is anyone that would like to raise a hand right now to provide comment, we could do that. I see, looks like Commissioner Rogers has raised his hand.
Okay, let's recognize Commissioner Rogers with his comments.
All right, Commissioner, you should be able to unmute now.
I've got it. Thank you. Do you hear us? Or me, I should say.
Yes, sir.
Great. Well, thank you. I promise not to come back every month, but I think this is so important that I'm going to bang on you just a bit more about it. And that's in regard to the Mstip program. I have two requests that you discussed at some point. The first one is bond rates are really low. We all know that. Inflation is taking off and costs are going to soar. So I strongly recommend, and I've been bringing this up at the commission meeting. I did the last time, I'll bring it up again tomorrow. And I know our internal staff is starting to look at this. We need to take a look at bonding future projects. I know historically we've been on a pay-as-you-go, except for one instance. Back in the Tom Bryan days, we went ahead and bonded some high-growth area projects. But I think it's time for you all to have a serious discussion about bonding MSTIP projects out into the future. You're going to save a tremendous amount of money, and the window of time is now. The second issue is the increase in the Opportunity Fund. As you know, that fund was created to allow for matching funds for a number of projects. This hasn't been successful. It's been wildly successful. And so I would recommend that we take a look at increasing that Opportunity Fund a lot more than it is right now. With the advent of new state, federal, regional funds, it's going to be important to have these dollars to match programs that are going to, or funds that are going to be available. So, Mr. Chair, I respectfully ask that at some point, this group that you're officiating on explore those two ideas of bonding MSTIP projects. You've got a ton of them. And secondly, to increase the Opportunity Fund so that the matching can be done for a number of new federal, state, and regional dollars that are coming in. So thank you very much. I promise to keep this project in front of our board of commissioners, and have a great meeting.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Chair Delane, I see Councilor Gonzalez has also raised his hand.
Councilor Gonzalez, what do you have to share with us?
Thanks, Mayor Delane. I figured I would chime in on Commissioner Rogers' points just now. It was more of a question. I know that when you bond against the general obligation bond, you need to when you sell those certain tranches, you need to be able to spend the money within a certain amount of time. Is that the same case for the MSTIP, or do we have the opportunity to just have those dollars in the bank and allocate as we go? The reason I ask is because, if we were to sell them now and bond against the MSTIP, then we would essentially have to know what projects are going to be funded at the point of sale. And, we have a lot of great projects, but I'm trying to connect those dots of what that looks like, and having the proper time to do, community engagement on those priority projects. But I agree with Commissioner Rogers that we have a window here where we can stretch some funds and also activate some federal and state dollars.
Yep. Thank you, Councilor. Yeah, we all bond funds would be subject to that time restriction, and there would need to be obviously some process around, would the board be interested in creating such a program, and then identifying what would be the specific projects and doing some outreach to build some support, I think, around a list here, and certainly working through the Washington County Coordinating Committee and the staff team as well. So thank you for that comment.
Absolutely. Good question, Councilor Gonzalez.
And I see Councilor Rosner has raised his hand.
Councilor Rosner.
President. Let's see here.
Thanks all. I just wanted to chime in as well, and just as everyone is thinking about using bonds, taking advantage of the low rates that we have right now, that money is fungible. You can bond against existing projects and bank money for future projects. So there are a lot of ways of looking at that and taking advantage of the rates now. Just wanted to point that out.
Great. Thank you. All right, and I believe that's all that we have right now.
Great. Introductions. Do we have any new members this month?
We do not have any new members this month.
Great. Well, then I think the rest of us all pretty much know each other. Stephen, could you do roll call then and confirm we have a quorum?
I can do that. Mayor Jones.
Here.
Mayor Beatty.
Here.
Mayor Delane.
Present.
Mayor Shirato. I don't know that Mayor Shirato is with us just yet. Mayor Truax.
Here.
Mayor Callaway.
Here.
Mayor Gibson.
Here.
Mayor Linehan.
Here.
Mayor Mays.
Here.
Mayor Snyder.
Here.
Mayor Bubenik.
Present.
Mayor Fitzgerald.
Here.
Commissioner Fye. I think. Oh, uh-oh. Did we lose Commissioner Fye? We might have. Oh, let's see. Bear with me just one second here. Chair Harrington, I see you have your hand up.
Chair Harrington, you're muted.
I'm Commissioner Fye's alternate, Catherine Harrington.
Thank you. I believe she was on the call, but I wonder if we've lost her. So we'll keep an eye out. So thank you, Chair. All right. So Chair Harrington, Councilor Rosenthal.
Present.
Matt Freitag.
Present.
And I don't believe we have our Port Rep or TriMet joining us today. So I believe that's it for roll call.
Thank you, Stephen.
It looks like Commissioner Fye was able to come back in.
Yeah, I think my connection, sorry about that. My connection went out, but I'm logging in now, so I should be on.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. All right. Mr. Chair.
Yeah,
Back to you.
let's start the meeting. First up on the agenda is consideration of the meeting minutes from November. Is there anyone wishing to recommend a change to those or motion?
I move that we approve the minutes.
I have a motion by Councillor Jones, Mayor Jones. Do we have a second?
Second.
Mayor Lenahan with the second. Any further discussion required? Any adjustments? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Councillor Nafi, I think you're in the affirmative, not the negative, correct?
Yes, sorry. You know, when you're on iPhone, it's like delayed. I realized it. Thank you, Chair Delane.
No problem, no problem. We're all working through the technology here. That's okay. Any abstentions? Okay, I got that as 100% an affirmation then. Good. No adjustments. Nice job, staff. Okay, well, first up then is the MSTIP Opportunity Fund request. Let's see, we do have Erin to present on that. She'll do a quick explanation of what's going on with that, and also request for the use of the MSTIP Opportunity Fund, and then we'll roll that up with a call for approval. Looking through my notes here. This is the last of the MSTIP Opportunity Fund until the Board of Commissioners provide direction for the Opportunity Fund through MSTIP 23-28. Erin, are you there?
I am here. Thank you.
You have the floor.
Thank you. Erin Wardell, Principal Transportation Planner with Washington County. We have a Mstip Opportunity Fund request from Washington County, but it's on behalf of the West Side Transportation Alliance. They are applying for a regional travel options grant through Metro. They're asking for $103,000 for their grant, and they need a Mstip Opportunity Fund match of $25,000. The TAC recommended approval at their December 2nd meeting of this request. Jeff Pozdalski is also here in the attendee list if there are any specific questions about the grant. And that's all we have.
That was definitely quick, Erin. Thank you. Any questions from our esteemed group? Mayor Truax.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I have not seen any questions being raised by the rest of the commission, so I will make the motion to approve the request.
Motion by Mayor Truax. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Second by Mayor Gibson. Any further discussion or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
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 Massive reverb there. Any against? Abstentions? Sounds like it passes unanimously. Good job, Erin. You wowed them over. Next up is climate-friendly and equitable community rulemaking. Let's see what I got for my notes on that one. DLCD staff, Kevin Young, is here to provide an overview of the rulemaking effort to implement the governor's executive orders directing agencies to reduce climate pollution. The rules will be presented to the Land Use Conservation and Development Commission for discussion and a public hearing in March. The goal today is to make sure we are all aware of the development of these rules, ask questions, and help us prepare for the comments. Page 2.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Kevin Young, and good afternoon, Chair and mayors and other attendees. My name is Kevin Young. I'm a senior urban planner with the Department of Land Conservation and Development. Along with Bill Holmstrom, who is also with us today, we are the project managers for this effort. So we will be providing you with a kind of a high-level overview, allowing some time for questions and other comments. Also, Evan Manbel will be joining us to speak about certain aspects of the rule. So I'm going to go ahead and share screens. And this presentation, we're going to try to keep it to 15 minutes. So we'll kind of be running through this. Many of you are probably already familiar with some elements of the rulemaking. All right, so hopefully you're seeing a slide, climate friendly and equitable communities. Let me just run through some of the great, fantastic, some of the background of where this effort started. Oops, let's go back here. So of course it started with Governor Brown's Executive Order 20-04, and that executive order issued in 2020. The governor directed state agencies to firstly exercise any and all authority and discretion to meet Oregon's climate pollution reduction goals. And secondly, in doing so, to prioritize equity, underserved populations, and specifically historically marginalized communities. So the work ahead of us is significant. We, at this time, are missing our pollution reduction targets pretty significantly. This graph shows us our current trajectory would have us reducing emissions somewhere around 20% by 2050. Where we need to get is a much greater reduction, down an 80% reduction by 2050. And so that's part of what we're trying to accomplish here. This effort, I should say, is focused on reducing climate pollution from light duty vehicles. So we're looking at cars and light trucks. And there are both transportation and land use components to the rules that we'll be sharing with you today. And additionally, we're also paying close attention to inequity, generational wealth, and making sure that the rules will culminate in equitable outcomes, particularly when we're looking at underserved communities. This particular slide shows you historic redlining, and with the results now that we have about 72% of white households who own homes, but only 42% of Black households that are currently own homes, based in part on these historic practices that have not been equitable. The rules that we'll be sharing with you will apply in Oregon's 8 metropolitan areas. They're shown here. Portland Metro is one of those areas, but it is different. And Portland Metro is different because the region is already well on its way to making progress in climate pollution reduction. With the 2040 growth concept, climate smart communities, we have been tracking that work, and some of our rules will apply in the region, and we'll be talking through that today. But other rules recognize that the region has already made very significant progress in meeting its climate pollution reduction goals. 2 categories of rulemaking, essentially. First of all is regional planning to meet our pollution reduction targets. That is sometimes referred to as regional scenario planning. And for the Portland Metro region, that work has already been done. So there will be no requirements other than the ongoing work that's happening on that effort in terms of the regional scenario planning. So the other metro regions do need to get that work going. And so those rules speak more to that side of things. The second piece is updated land use and transportation rules. And, oops, I'm sorry. Before I get into the land use and transportation rules, I'll just jump back and share again. The climate smart strategy is basically the strategy that was developed through that regional scenario planning process. And we know the region is in the process of implementing that plan, which was adopted in 2014, approved by LCDC in 2015. The updated planning rules will be what we'll largely be focusing on today. And those are rules in 6 areas, talking about climate-friendly areas, reforming parking management, supporting electric vehicle charging, requirements for high-quality pedestrian, bike, and transit infrastructure, moving beyond a focus on motor vehicle congestion standards in transportation planning, and then prioritizing and selecting projects, largely transportation projects, to meet our climate and equity outcomes. So we'll walk through these kind of in a general overview. So in terms of the climate-friendly areas requirement, these are climate-friendly areas are basically walkable mixed-use communities. And the 2040 growth concept, as you know, already identifies town and regional centers, basically to reach the same goals. And so because of that, we're not requiring local governments in the region to redo that work. The rules, the current draft of the rules would have Metro establish a requirement for local government adoption of those Region 2040 centers and land use regulations no later than December 31st of 2024. That's for the local governments that have yet to adopt those boundaries, which I think is the minority of local governments in the region. And then following that deadline, those local governments would have an additional year to adopt those boundaries and associated land use regulations. The only other requirement in relation to climate-friendly areas is a requirement for cities in the region with population over 10,000 to report on affordable housing production, mitigation of displacement, and increasing housing choices within those Region 2040 centers every 6 years. And that would be done every 6 years through the housing production strategy work that is now an ongoing component based on House Bill 2003 requirements. So cities are updating their housing needs analyses, and then following that, they're adopting housing production strategies. This would be a part of that report. And I think with that, I will turn it over to Evan to speak about parking management.
Thanks, Kevin. Evan Mandel, DLCD. Reforming parking is a central part of this rulemaking. It's also something that was identified in the climate smart strategy up in Metro, but hasn't happened across the region. It's happened in bits and pieces. So we're deciding, we're in conversations with how it applies in the Metro region. That's an ongoing conversation. How it will apply, at least in the downstate communities, is a three-part thing. First, it kind of takes best practices from codes across Oregon on how parking spaces are counted, options for providing alternatives, that sort of thing. And it integrates those into required code. The second thing it does is it gives communities three options on how to reform their parking. First is to just deregulate it and to get rid of the one-size-fits-all parking mandates that have been out there for a long time. And communities all over the globe have done this over the last couple of decades. They've said, oh, local builders can figure it out. They're what their customers need as far as parking. So that's the first option. The second option is, the second and third options, I should say, both require reform in a couple of general areas. One is the climate friendly areas Kevin talked about. And the other is along priority transit corridors where parking is less in demand. And we want more dense development and less large parking lots. So option two adds on to that by saying, hey, communities can do 3 of 5 policies, such as unbundling parking, which is paying for it separately from the rent. So renters who don't use the parking don't pay for it. Or flexible commute benefits where employers provide a financial benefit to those who don't use one of their employer provided parking spaces. So those sorts of policies. Option 3, if you don't want to adopt those sorts of policies, communities just further deregulate parking for things like historic buildings, small businesses, that sort of thing. So that's option 3. And the last bit of the parking reform is asking communities over 100,000 population to do a little bit more parking management, to set some parking maximums and do some other things there. So that wouldn't apply to most of you, but it would apply to a couple of the communities in Washington County. So that's kind of the big level overview. It is a significant change for some communities. Go ahead, Kevin. Yeah, the second thing that the Metro government said was okay if we to just have this folks across Oregon or across the MPOs is boost electric vehicle charging. And this is just saying, hey, when you're building new stuff, let's build the conduit so it can support charging in the future. And let's build some of the let's include some of the electrical service capacity. So this is kind of the direction. Conduit's super cheap relatively to install when you're building, but a lot more expensive to retrofit. So this is saying in a significant number of spaces in residential and mixed use, 50% of spaces, and then 20% of spaces in commercial. You have conduit there that to support electric vehicle charging, and then you have capacity for 20% of spaces, electric capacity, service capacity for that. And then there's a conformance requirement for larger communities upon major retrofit. So those are those two provisions of the rules as drafted currently.
All right, now I think we'll turn it over to Bill to speak to amendments to transportation planning rules.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, everybody, for having me. My name is Bill Holmstrom. I'm the agency's Land Use and Transportation Planning Coordinator, and along with Kevin, we're the two staff who are leading the effort at DLCD to put these rules together. I'll talk real quick about how we're planning to shift how we do transportation planning in the transportation planning rules, which are a set of rules that the state has had for about 30 years that says how local governments do coordinated land use and transportation planning together, and how local governments put together transportation system plans, which most jurisdictions, or almost every jurisdiction, has. I'll say that these slides are aimed at kind of the wider statewide audience, and in the Portland metropolitan area, things are different, as you know, with a little bit different institutional setup with having Metro there and having that regional scale of planning that we don't have in other parts of the state. One main reason we're doing this is because the other parts of the state don't have that set up, and we've had some difficulty getting them to have the same kind of success that you've had in the Portland metropolitan area. So some of these things are going to be a little bit different in Metro. There's going to be a little bit more flexibility available to jurisdictions in the Portland metropolitan area based on kind of what the success you're already having. So I just wanted to start off with that. A lot of what we're talking about is making sure that we're bringing a renewed focus on planning for pedestrians, bicycle, and public transportation networks. Obviously, a lot of work already that local jurisdictions are already doing a lot of good work on this. We've done an excellent work over the last half a century or so of building a complete street network. So if you have the ability or the physical ability or financial ability to be able to drive a car, you can get from here to there without very few gaps. Can't say the same thing about our existing pedestrian, bicycle, or transit networks, obviously. So trying to bring those up to the same level where it's easy to you have the ability to make a choice between those modes. When I talk about pedestrian networks, and talk about networks for people who walk but also use mobility devices. And when I talk about bicycle networks, I want to make sure that I'm talking about not just people riding bikes, but electric bicycles, which are going to be huge, and then scooters or other devices that get invented that that kind of operate at that same size and scale as the bicycle. We want to make sure that we're planning for connected, safe, and complete networks that are available to a wide range of people in our community. And some of them may not be able to drive, some may be able to drive, but we want to have attractive options for people. And in particular, we want to prioritize climate-friendly areas, as Kevin mentioned a little bit earlier. Those get a little bit different context in the Portland metro area. You can think about those as your town centers or your regional centers. Neighborhoods with underserved populations, we want to make sure that we're paying attention to those places that maybe have received historical disinvestment or malinvestment over the years, and that we're doing an appropriate level of investment in those places and paying attention to those areas and listening to the people that live there about what their needs are. And then, of course, we want to make sure that we're providing access to key destinations so that people are able to live their daily lives without necessarily having to drive a car, right? So they're able to go to school, go shopping, go to work, go to a medical appointment, all those sorts of things. Next slide, please. In addition to beefing up those requirements, we're also making sure that we want to select projects that we have a variety of prioritization factors that we're putting on a list that for people to choose which projects they're going to move forward and put into their transportation system plan. And one thing that's a little bit different now is that we're asking people when they get to And I'm not exactly sure how this is going to work in Metro, but in other parts of the state, you'll have an illustrative list of local projects. And across that list of projects that need to work to meet the climate pollution reduction goals. So basically, you know, are we with this set of projects going to reducing driving and allowing other modes of travel to be increased. And that's kind of a shift for especially those other 7 metropolitan areas and how they've done planning in the past. But that's something that the state's putting a focus on. We're going to be developing a lot of tools to help them do that. And then the last kind of piece of this is talk about how a shift in how we measure success in the transportation system. A lot of how we measure success now is through one or a handful of metrics, which basically look at how many cars are going through an intersection in a peak hour or something like that. There's a lot of other reasons that we build our transportation system, a lot of other values that are important to us, including safety, being able to access goods and services, having, you know, connectivity so you can get multiple ways to get from A to B, other than just that congestion measure for vehicles. You know, people walk, people bike too, people take the bus. So you want to make sure that we're looking at a range of measurements of success. So not just moving cars, although we're holding on to that, we're not losing that, but we're looking at a range of things. So those are kind of the big piece, big picture, high level. I just want to mention real quick, you know, we've talked with a lot of your staff already about a lot of these issues, and we've been in touch with them. So I'll go hand this back over to Kevin.
Thanks, Bill. Just kind of to show you where we are in the process and opportunities for input as we move forward. So we have convened a 40+ member rulemaking advisory committee. We've met, I think now 10 times. Is that right? No, 9 times. We have 2 more meetings. Our next meeting is on December 17th, and then our final rulemaking advisory committee meeting will be on January 20th. And those have been great conversations. We've been working through a lot of stuff there. And so if you're interested in providing input to that process, non-commission input can come to staff at any time, or written testimony can be provided to the rulemaking advisory committee. Maybe somebody could put that address in the chat, or just the general CFAC address in chat. That would be super helpful. Following that work, we will then be preparing the rules for consideration by the Land Conservation and Development Commission. We'll be checking in with them on February 3rd, and then moving to our first hearing either on March 31st or April 1st of 2022, and then with adoption anticipated in May of 2022. And I believe that's our last slide. So I will go ahead and stop share, and we are available to answer any questions you have.
I see first up is Metro Councilor Rosenthal. You'll need to unmute, Rosenthal.
I get it. Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. Question for Bill on the issue for the climate-friendly communities or the climate-friendly cities or communities. Have you given any thought, or will there be any guidance on when you might call planning radii for pedestrian, bicycle, and then transit? I mean, obviously, the distance for safe walking. I mean, you're not going to walk 3 hours to get to a spot. The distance for bicycling, especially with electric, is a lot greater than pedestrian, and that's a lot less than potential transit. Have you given any idea to that sort of focus radii?
Yeah, Councilor Rosenthal, thank you for that question. I think we have different rules for each of those different kinds of modes, and they are trying to be kind of specific for the kinds of trips that we expect each of those modes to be most successful. So for walking, I don't think we've lined out exactly like half a mile or anything like that, or a mile. We don't have. We've tried to avoid, or we've cut back on the amount of kind of specific numbers we're putting in the rules, but to avoid being too prescriptive. But certainly there's an understanding that you're taking. We want a lot of short trips to be by foot or by bicycle, and those kind of more medium trips to be more by bicycle or by transit. And the longer they go, the less likely those are going to be walking or cycling. But in particular with cycling, we're looking for a connected network of safe routes in order to get between places in particular.
Just the reason I ask is because obviously we do, there's a lot of transportation-oriented development grants that Metro deals with. And so I was just wondering if there's going to be additional guidance regarding, whether it should qualify for a TOD under new guidelines or something like that.
I don't think we're getting into that level of specificity in these rules, and I don't think we're going to get in the way of that either.
Okay, great, thanks.
Mayor Truax, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If we go back to the map of inequity and generational wealth, I guess my issue there is one that was first addressed by my predecessor in this office as mayor of Forest Grove, that whenever we saw maps of the metropolitan area, it seems that Forest Grove was sort of left off. They would either put the map key over the top of Forest Grove and Cornelius, or maybe that in order to make the map large enough, they would whack off the end of the west end of the situation. This time around, I don't see it with the exception of the Sawtooth border between Washington and Multnomah County. There's not a whole lot of Washington County located on this particular map. Now, if this is just an example of inequity and generational wealth, that's one thing. But I think we probably need to look at that same map with respect to Washington County. It would probably paint the same kind of picture, and we would have the same kind of concerns. But I would appreciate a little bit more of a Washington County-izing, I guess, for this particular project. The rest of the work I have little, if any, complaint with, but that was just my one chauvinistic comment, I guess. Thank you.
Mayor Callaway or staff, did you have a response on why we didn't include the entire metro region?
I'll just say this is based on some analysis that City of Portland has completed. So apologies. No, we haven't dug deeply into the history of Washington County. I don't disagree with anything that's been said, though.
Thank you, Mayor Callaway.
Thank you. Several comments and then a question. My first comment is I am concerned about the requirements that are placed on smaller cities. In Hillsborough, Beaverton, our larger cities, we have departments, but cities the size of Cornelius or maybe Forest Grove, their department is one person. And so I really feel like this puts an undue burden on some of our smaller cities. Secondly, back, more to Hillsborough's concerns, these seem very prescriptive and they don't allow flexibility, because I think that, it's reasonable to offer cities the opportunity to kind of create a little bit of a custom fit. But this really is an off the rack rules for all of us. And I think in some cases will create, problems worse than the solutions that they're trying to bring to the table. And, the timing on this, again, as you've heard, is still really tight. And we appreciate some of the flexibility that we've seen, but with some of the technical analysis, it's just really hard. And then last of all, I've seen the mention of equity several times in this, and recognizing that a lot of our lower income BIPOC community members live in our older housing stock. And these areas lie adjacent to our older and busier arterials. Then the fact that you are removing some of the traffic performance measures, which could allow us to increase the efficiencies at intersections. And a good example is adding a second turn lane. And by not having these traffic performance measures, It does, it prevents us from alleviating some of the safety concerns, delays, air toxins and things like that, right next to some of our most sensitive residents and older BIPOC communities. And so I'd just like to know why the performance measures are being removed, and yet we're still claiming to focus on equity.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Callaway. I'll try to answer that your last question there, which is about the performance standards. And I think, you know, the rules have undergone an evolution since we started the process. And I think I tried to mention that we're not getting rid of performance standards that have to do with motor vehicle congestion. So I think, you know, we may have started there. But I think we heard comments very similar to what you are saying, that, you know, there are impacts on, you know, neighbors that are close to those locations, and that we need to take those seriously. We heard that from organizations that work with folks that are underserved in our communities. So we are not taking that away. We're trying to layer on additional values on top of that. So that's not the only thing that we're looking at anymore.
Thank you. And thank you, Chair.
You're welcome. Mayor Gibson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And Bill, I think you mentioned that you've communicated with staff on this. And as you know, King City, we're in the middle of our transportation system planning and master planning process. And I'm just wondering, at what level have you communicated, most of all, with our city manager, Mike Weston, on what these plans are and what you guys are working on? And then the second part of that question, is it possible for this kind of presentation to be made to our planning commission and city council? Because I really think it's going to be important for everybody involved to kind of understand what's going on, what's being discussed, especially since we are moving forward with transportation system planning and master planning.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Gibson. So I will say we've spoke in King City in particular. We've spoken with Keith Leiden, who I believe is, okay. I'm not sure if he's a contract planner or
no,
what.
He is. Yeah. And he's a good source too. Yes.
Yeah. So we try to make sure that, you know, we're not, I know you're in the middle of doing a transportation system plan update, and there's some other jurisdictions around the state that are doing that as well. So we're trying to make sure we're not upsetting apple carts with underway projects, that, you know, folks are able to make those work without causing too much trouble there. So that is just a discussion we've had with your staff in particular. In terms of going to local planning commissions or city council meetings, I think in general we're open to that. I will say we're a limited staff.
Yes, I understand.
There are over 40 jurisdictions that are going to be involved, you know, across the state in this, and that's a lot to ask, just of us to go individually. So to the extent possible, we try to go to meetings like this where we're talking to people across the county, right?
Sure.
We're happy to do that. I'm not saying we won't do that. We have done that, I think, for a few jurisdictions in the past that have asked for that. But okay. Just be aware that we're already pretty tightly scheduled, and maybe, you know, next year sometime, as we're a little bit further along, we might have a little bit more availability to do that.
Okay.
Yeah, Kevin.
Certainly would be appreciated if you can do it.
I just wanted to add too, we should have mentioned this earlier. We are meeting later this week, actually Wednesday. I believe that meeting starts at 9:30 with MTAC and TPAC. And I believe the invitation was extended to planning directors from within the metro region to do a little bit of a deeper dive into our rules. And so we expect that meeting to be pretty well attended.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Mayor Bubenik.
Good afternoon. I've just got 3 points I'd like to make fairly quickly. Based on our analysis and quick review, we have 3 concerns. One being we feel could limit the rules could limit our ability to mitigate traffic issues in a proposed development. Most times we have to work with a developer to make sure that the neighborhood isn't overrun or they're going to overflow. Sorry. our roads. So we're kind of nervous that any rules you implement will take away our ability to do that. Second, we're a little bit nervous that it might make it hard for Tualatin to add capacity to our TSP when we need to add capacity to our roads. And finally, I'll beat up on TriMet when it comes to public transportation. Looking at the slide, as you know, we're in the southern edge of TriMet's service area, and the service down here sucks, to be quite frank. So to get people on buses that don't go east-west and are pretty much just north-south focused isn't going to work. So somehow, if this rules are being implemented, TriMet would have to greatly increase its service throughout the communities. We're relying on Ride Connection right now, that shuttle, to do the last mile kind of service, but even that doesn't cover all of our community to get people back and forth, say, to the Fred Meyer. So there's going to be a focus on public transportation. There's got to be a real conversation with TriMet how they're going to roll this out to all the areas within the metro region. Thank you.
Staff, any response?
Just on those first couple of points, I would say please have your staff or whoever send us an email if there's the particular pieces of the rules that seem like they're going to be an issue. There's probably things that we've heard before from other jurisdictions, and we're going to look at, but it would be helpful to know exactly kind of which pieces there are. On terms of the public transit piece, I will say, we know as a state that we need to have to meet our goals under the state transportation strategy to meet our climate goals, be up 4 times as much transit as we have today. Substantial increases in the amount of transit service. It's not just Tualatin, it's all over the state. LCDC doesn't have the power just to conjure more transit service. We're trying to plan for a future or set local jurisdictions up for a future where we have that level of service, but that's going to have to happen at a different level than we're able to control.
Thank you. Mayor Mays.
Thanks, Jeff. I agree with all of what Frank just said, but TriMet service in Tualatin is great compared to Sherwood. So that gives you an idea of that perspective. Lots of frustration with what you guys are talking about. I haven't gotten into the details of like parking, but all the rules that we have to abide by from Metro are already sufficient. In our opinion, we would hope that nothing that you guys propose goes farther than Metro. And it's interesting that from what you say, we can't predict the future on as things progress, if we're going to be, getting rid of all of gas powered vehicles, and how quickly we'll be going to electric. And there's the bet, are we going to be, evolving into a mass transit and transportation as a service model? So I don't know. It's just what I know today is in our community, one of the biggest conflicts between neighbors in whatever housing type, one of the number one issues is parking. And let's not create more conflict, people. That's all I'm saying. Thanks.
Staff, did you have any comment, or should I move on to Mayor Fitzgerald?
No, I just briefly, Mayor Mays, I appreciate that. We do have various resources on how to best manage parking to try to reduce those conflicts, because we are aware that it's a site specific thing, even given the current parking rules that communities have. So we do have some publications, and we're planning to provide additional assistance on helping people manage their on-street parking.
Evan, you're funny. Thanks.
Okay.
Mayor Fitzgerald.
Thank you. I appreciate the things that have been said. I would add that we just had a discussion about the rulemaking in our council work session, and the staff was asking, where did the council think that our staff should focus their efforts in participating in the rulemaking? And the one area that was of great interest was Was this parking management to the point that, yes, we need to keep our traffic moving through the intersections. And so we do need to continue to use the traffic management systems available that have been working as well as they have for vehicles. And that we also definitely want to improve the experience and safety for pedestrians and bicycle riders and transit. So I was just thinking that, you know, we have a transit system in Wilsonville that continues to do well, and we want to do even better. And I know that our transit director is working with some small transit providers. So though DLCD is different from TriMet and doesn't have jurisdiction over certain things, I think there's going to have to be a lot higher level of collaboration among all of these systems so that we can get the most out of the bikehead improvements we all have in our communities, and that we can improve this transit east-west as Mayor Bubenek described. So as much as we can break down the walls so that where rules are being developed, they're taking into account the need to expand transit 4 times, for example. Thank you.
As seeing no other questions, I'll do a couple of quick jump-ins on unbundled parking. We've experimented in that. It's not been a popular experience because when you pay to park, then you basically say, well, I'll go park where it doesn't pay, which is the next neighborhood over. So now we have all the cars parked, causing exactly what Mayor Mays was talking about, the conflict, because people can't park in their own neighborhood because the neighbors are parking in their neighborhood because we didn't require sufficient parking spaces for the people. Everyone on this phone has heard it. Evan and Bill haven't heard it because they haven't been in meetings with me. I have a community where 55% Latino, and that means a lot of those folks are on the lower end of the earning scale. And that means most households have 4+ cars because every one of those people has to go somewhere for a job. Cornelius only has about 300 jobs in it and 3,000 job seekers. So not having a good land supply balance that puts jobs in our community requires us to drive to Portland, Tualatin, Sherwood, Hillsborough for jobs. So we've got a land problem balancing. And even if you had the jobs, I think if we talked with Mayor Bubenek, he'd tell you the people go somewhere else for him. He's got a lot of jobs, but people leave there, and then the Cornelius people go to jobs in Tualatin. So we've got to look at that issue, right? I think the prescription is really hard, right? The prescription nature of what's been shared from my staff from their briefings on the climate smart. We all agree that we need to make changes. We're just trying to figure what the curve is that we can actually do it. Putting a 100-story building with no parking in Cornelius, probably not marketable, but also not workable. Our entire community is covered by the half-mile restrictions of the basically north and south of the bus line, the one bus line that runs through East and West County. So those are kind of hard. The big one for my staff, and I think you've heard it from all of us, timeline. We need a little relief on the timeline. If you could take anything back to rulemaking, there's a lot of things being requested on us by Metro already that have come through state, the housing needs, all of these things. We just don't have enough staff, consultants, and money to meet all these tight timelines. We need to back a couple of these timelines off, and my staff has recommended at least a year on some of them, so we have time enough to move through all the requirements. Thank you very much for coming. Sorry that was a bit of a grump at you at the end there, but I do really appreciate it, and I think all of our council recognize that we need to make changes. We're just trying to figure out how to get from where we are today to where we need to be. Mayor Mays?
Thanks, Jeff. And I guess it's a more pointed question to our guests. If the majority of vehicles become electric, why do you care about parking? Why should we care about parking?
Yeah, sure.
Restrictions,
Sure.
I'm saying.
Well,
Restrictions.
two reasons. I'm sorry, I don't understand the restriction. Well, generally the math still doesn't work, even if the vehicles are electric. There's still a lot of pollution attached to moving 3,000 pounds around. And hopefully that'll reduce over time as our energy sources change and that sort of thing. But the second reason is land use. Parking takes up about 20% of most cities on and off street combined. So it pushes things apart and makes it harder for people to get around without driving. So it's also that equity component that most of the people who don't own cars, most of the households who don't own cars are in the bottom 20% of incomes. So those people are paying for parking that they're not consuming and subsidizing other folks. So both the climate numbers, electric vehicles is important, but it's not sufficient to meet our climate goals, and then equity as well. So that and parking impacts both of those. So again, these rules do not generally restrict how much parking you can build. They just say builders can figure it out by themselves.
And maybe ARC staff here can help us understand, because as I received that same feedback is that we're getting, is it metro rules that are requiring us to put no parking within a half mile? Is that different than the DLCD rulemaking that says no parking within half mile of transit?
So again, this is in the draft rules say communities could not require it. It's not saying you can't build it. Builders can still build it. It doesn't do it doesn't limit how much you can build, besides larger communities having to study and set appropriate parking maximums, but this does not limit how much parking you can build. Generally, this is saying within a half mile of your most frequent transit, you should allow builders to build without figure out how much they do. And the experience, again, from a couple of decades is you end up with a diversity of developments providing a diversity of parking. And sometimes it's not enough and you have to deal with spillover, but usually it's enough, or, those people will go bankrupt. Those people who can't find customers for their product. So that's what the data have shown in communities across the world for a couple of decades.
Councilor Rosenthal, last comment, and then we're moving on.
Well, just a response that, as far as I know, it's not a metro requirement. I've seen various kinds, and we usually go with what the city's requirement are. We sometimes ask for slightly fewer parking requirements if it's a subsidized less than 30% AMI, because those people tend to have fewer vehicles. But I've also commented recently on one in Milwaukee where they had no parking, and I thought that this was just marketable from a marketable standpoint, not appropriate. But we didn't have a requirement one way or the other. It was a question of letting the developer or the city determine what the parking requirements were going to be.
And I think that's where we get into is we cannot require parking based on the draft rules. So there is no city control. We have lost any control to require that. So I think that's where the rub is the inability to require any parking.
Yeah. And last comment, Mayor, I've been in contact with your staff and asked if a provision that we put in there for on narrow streets to apply for an exemption worked. So definitely trying to work this out, trying to find if there are circumstances under which communities can apply for exemptions and while still making a lot of progress on parking reform. So continuing to continuing to get feedback. We appreciate it. We appreciate the engagement of your staff.
Thank you, everybody. Okay, well, we're way over time. We need to move on to Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act 2021 and Oregon Transportation Commission allocation process. Let's see, ODOT, urban arterials. Boy, there's a lot of stuff here. Chris, I love all your notes. Matt Freitag, I think you're up with Kate Hawkins. You're going to provide a short overview, maybe short?
Very short, yes. Thank you. Actually, I'm joined today by Vanessa Visser, our Strategic Initiative Advisor in Region 1. So, yeah, thanks, everyone. Vanessa, could you hit the next slide? I'm sorry, you're not running it. Somebody else is, but okay, that works great. So real quick, a couple key messages. So these funds are going to help address many of our most pressing transportation challenges in Oregon. There's new money in here for electric vehicle charging, active transportation, transit operations, and basic maintenance and preservation of our transportation system. This also represents a change in funding priorities, putting much greater emphasis on climate change than we've seen historically from federal infrastructure bills. But because of the changes ODOT's made over the last few years, as highlighted in our strategic action plan, which has 3 priorities: equity for all users, building and maintaining a modern transportation system, and seeking sufficient and reliable funding, we're in a good position to receive these additional funds from competitive grants and to modernize our transportation system. And also, with many of our projects shovel ready and others are completing the planning phase, we're ready to move quickly on this new opportunity. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Vanessa to hit some of the highlights today.
Great, and you can go to the next slide. So I'll just provide a little bit more detail, but this pie chart shows the breakdown of funding coming to Oregon. So funds are going to come in several forms. Some will be designated by the federal government for specific categories. And there will be about $100 billion in new funding for the US DOT to distribute through competitive discretionary grants. And there will be about $400 million in flexible funding for the Oregon Transportation Commission to allocate. So in terms of new programs, there will be funding to invest in bridges. And as Matt said, electric vehicle charging infrastructure, projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and projects that increase the transportation system's resilience to earthquakes and natural disasters. We'll also receive funding for existing programs that have been reauthorized for an additional 5 years, and they're receiving additional funding. So those programs are transit, safety, active transportation, and passenger rail. And then there's going to be about $200 million for local priorities for cities, counties, and MPOs to invest. And about 32% of the total funds coming to Oregon will be dedicated to flexible funds, and that will be what the OTC allocates. And if you want to go to the next slide, this is a general timeline of what to expect. So from November to December, staff are gathering input from stakeholders like yourselves on how to allocate some of the funds that haven't already been pre-allocated or coming as formula funds. And then from January to February, staff will share that input we receive from stakeholders with the OTC and start developing scenarios on how these program funds will be allocated. And then in March, the OTC will make a final decision on a scenario for funding. And then one more slide. This is kind of an overview of what's happening now. We'll have more information as it becomes available, but there was an update to the Region 1 Act last week, and also an ODOT webinar where more information was shared. There'll be a presentation to JPAC this week. I encourage you all to listen, and Travis Brower, who's managing this work, will share quite a few more details on how the funds will be rolled out. And then lastly, there's a link to a comment card to provide more information to the OTC. And with that, we can take questions or comments, and if we can't answer them, we can follow up with more information.
That was awesomely quick. Thank you. Vanessa, the one is, I think it's on the 16th, not the 18th for JPAC, because it's Thursday. 18th would be Saturday.
Thank you for catching that error.
No, that's the weird stuff I do. That's how I am. Who do we have that wants to make comments or questions here?
Not seeing any hands raised right now, Chair.
Great. Chris, you had some stuff you wanted to talk with us about the points in the letter. Could you step in?
Yeah, yes, thanks. On the JPAC agenda is a letter where to seek JPAC approval to send a letter to the Oregon Transportation Commission on regional priorities for funding. And the letter was really developed with the input of staff from around the region. And it highlights 4 main areas, which seem pretty familiar. One is funding for the ODOT-owned urban arterials. The second one is for funding primarily for safety improvements for some of those other major arterials, which tend to get kind of spot safety improvements now. The third one is giving OTC the direction to figure out how, but to try to get a little more coordinated in the approach to the two major tolling studies going on right now, those environmental analysis. And the fourth one is to continue to increase funds for bridges. So those are the four main areas. And I did send the letter out. It's supposed to be in the JPAC packet, but it just got finished up Friday, and it looks like Metro hasn't had the time to update it to the JPAC packet. So I took the liberty and just sent it out to you this morning. So any comments? It has actually been a good discussion, and several of your staff have been participating in that discussion that Metro has led. So I just wanted you to be aware of that, and you can either share comments here, share comments we have two. We have Mayor Callaway and Commissioner Fye who sit on JPAC, and we'll be taking action on that. So open for your discussion. Just wanted to get this in front of you.
Table, questions, comments? We all talked ourselves out on climate smart and friendly. Okay. Chris, thanks for getting that letter out. Okay. Thanks for taking all that feedback from everybody. I know you got some that was up to the last minute before the letter was the ink wasn't even quite dry. You got some more feedback. So thanks for taking the time to handle that. Yeah, and this is a different letter. The other letter that we talked about last week is the end of the packet. So yeah, so this will be up for JPAC discussion on Thursday, this one. Okay, great. Steve, you think you got what you need from the cities for talking about this? Good.
We do. Chris is doing a great job, coordinating with all the city staff folks. So.
Great. Commissioner Fye, did you have any questions or comments? You're good? Awesome, thank you. Well, that brings us, we're almost caught back up on time. That takes us to MST, thanks Chris, takes us to MSTIP 2328. Aaron will be presenting this. We'll be seeking comments for the County Commissioning Board on the equity framework for MSTIP 2328. Aaron?
Thank you. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So the purpose of our briefing today is to provide you with an overview of our draft equity framework and community engagement plan. We'll then outline our next steps for the project. And then at the end, I have a slide sharing a summary of the feedback that we heard through our briefings with the city councils and with each of you, individual members who requested those briefings. We were asked previously to share that back out. So I'm looking forward to hearing your feedback on that. But the first thing I'd like to do is introduce all of you to Fabiola Casas. We shared previously that we were hiring a consultant to help us do our equity framework and engagement work. Fabiola works for John L. Bell at Espousal Strategies, and she's our Mstip project manager. So Fabiola will be handling the next set of slides. Go ahead, Fabiola.
Awesome. Thank you, Aaron. And good afternoon to everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. So as Aaron said, I'm going to give an overview on essentially two major aspects of the work that we're leading alongside Aaron's team, and that is the equity framework and our community engagement plan. So we'll start with the equity framework, which I believe on the next slide is an overview of key elements that are going into this framework. And so here you see three major points that outline the purpose. So I'll just go through each of those. The first one is to help equip Washington County to implement community engagement processes that lead to equitable long-range plans and ultimately equitable housing and transportation outcomes. And we're really seeing our engagement with the community helping us to get to this bigger goal of more equitable housing and transportation. The second is to identify ways to address barriers that prevent historically marginalized groups from meaningful participation in public decision-making processes. We know that across the region, there are more and more agencies and government bodies that are attempting to address some of those barriers. And so we are leading the way in helping ensure that this process is done well and authentically and aligned with the goals that the county has as well for these projects. And the third one here is to deepen decision makers' understanding, and that includes you all, of who is considered an equity priority community based on previous county equity work. So we are building on all of the good work that Washington County has been leading for the last several years, and also making sure that it is that we're including relevant community-based research and ongoing data analysis. So we are building off a lot of really awesome work that's been happening and integrating all of that with new information that's coming out on a regular basis. So we're looking at all of that to inform our equity framework. So on the next slide, you'll see our desired outcomes, and those ones here, I'll just read off from this slide. The first one is that equity priority communities will have an increased access to decision-making process and meaningful influence on county policies. The second one, the county's outreach and engagement efforts will help build greater trust with equity priority communities. Next, a better overall understanding of the impact that housing and transportation policies and decisions have on equity priority communities. Next, that engagement with equity priority communities will help prevent and or reduce potential harmful impacts. And finally, that we are being mindful of transparency in equity considerations during the decision-making process. We can go to the next slide. We wanted to provide some key definitions that are being included in the framework. Once you get a chance to review the full document, you'll see that we're including a lot more, but these are some of the ones that we wanted to highlight just to make sure that we are more or less getting on the same page about what we mean when we talk about equity, racial equity, and inclusion. There's a lot of work being done in the region, and folks think about these terms and concepts in different ways. So this is our attempt to make sure, again, that we are more or less getting on the same page about what we mean in the work that we're doing. So I'll read the definitions. The first one here, equity, is the result of fairness and justice in the creation and delivery of public policy. Equity in Washington County will exist when every county resident has the resources to participate fully in the region's economic vitality, has access to the county services and other resources, and the opportunity to reach their full potential. Racial equity is the condition that results when race no longer determines one's socioeconomic outcomes. Resources contributing to racial equity include strategic investments, policies and practices that reverse racial disparities, eliminate institutional racism, and ensure that outcomes and opportunities for all people are no longer predictable by race. And here, looking at updated data on a regular basis and doing disparity analysis and continued analysis along the way will help us know at different points if we are getting closer to those goals that we're outlining here. And finally, the inclusion, the definition here is welcoming and supporting the active engagement and participation of diverse individuals in the decision-making process of an organization or group. And here we're looking closely at what different communities need. So whether that's language, interpretation, translation, we're looking at how meetings are facilitated, who's in the room, who's invited, how all of that is communicated. There's a lot of different pieces, but so those are three definitions to kind of lay the foundation of what we're talking about here. In the next slide, you'll see this is a snapshot of what the equity index, the mapping tool that we will be using is looking like right now. The index, it's a map-based tool that combines demographic data with other community and neighborhood characteristics to identify where areas are in the greatest need of improvements. And this is overlapped with concentrations of equity priority communities. So we're in the midst of compiling all of that information so that we can have a visual that helps us better see where some of those some of the equity priority areas are around the county, and that'll be an element that's going to be taken into consideration as decisions are made about where those investments should be made. So that is the index, and you can go on to the next slide. And so again, the framework is really laying a foundation for how we are going into the community and engaging folks. And so we are integrating the framework with our strategies in the community engagement plan. And here are some of the key elements to our approach. Those are incorporating an equity-focused community engagement framework. As I said, consider existing county engagement work. So we're doing a lot of coordination and collaboration to ensure that we're leveraging the work that is currently being done. We know that a lot of community-based organizations or folks out in the community are being asked from different entities to get engaged. So we just want to make sure that folks don't feel like it's too much or that it's repetitive. So we're doing a lot of that coordination work just to make sure that folks feel like when they show up that it is that we're valuing their time and energy. So next, we are relying on a variety of strategically chosen activities, presentations, and events. So really thinking about what type of engagement is going to be most effective at different key milestones along the project timeline. Next, there will be a culmination in a collection of input from engagement in order to assess and report on how the engagement framework and activities impacted planning work. So we are doing a lot of, we're going to be doing a lot of synthesizing of what we're hearing along the way and making sure that that information is being taken into consideration as next steps are being planned throughout this project timeline, but also in the future, just setting up a model for what that could look like. And finally, we'll be creating opportunities for recommendations to improve future engagement efforts, which is connected to what I had just mentioned. All right, so our main goals are to build trust in relationships with the community. And this will take time, and I really appreciate everyone's support so that we can continue to build on the good work that's already being done. Next, we want to create a better understanding of community needs. And finally, we want to provide information and understanding about both the Mstip and middle housing processes and how the community can influence their outcomes. And these are two projects that we're working with simultaneously, and they have different unique goals, but generally this is what we're trying to achieve through our efforts during this period. So on the next slide here, you'll see different measures of success. So we're looking at both quantitative and qualitative measures to assess what we're doing. These are all our initial measures that we've drafted because this is an iterative process, and it's an iterative and dynamic process. So this is what we're envisioning we'll be capturing, but we're still in the middle of finalizing our plans, which that will be done in the next week or so. So if you see any changes later on, it's just because this is we're still continuing to do quite a bit of work on making sure that we're capturing the right information for you all and the folks that are interested in this process. So some of our quantitative measures are simply the number of registrations and participants for each of our events. We want to look at, we'll have a couple different surveys, so we'll want to look at how many folks are completing the surveys. And there's a couple other ones there about just the number of folks that we're engaging. For the qualitative measures, we'll be doing meeting summaries from all of the public engagement events that we do, and making sure that we are compiling the information in a way where we're seeing key themes surface to make the results more meaningful for bodies like yours and other places and other folks that are interested in what we're hearing. We'll also be looking at the demographics of the survey responses and those who are coming to the events. And that is to make sure that we are able to identify trends and gaps along the way and to see where there is room for improvement in the future. And finally, the last qualitative measure is analysis of survey responses and listening session feedback. And again, just making sure that the information that we're hearing is digestible, that it's meaningful, and that you all can take that in when it's ready, and hopefully have that inform your own decision-making processes. All right, so next steps, I can't believe we're already in the middle of December, but here we are. In December, what we'll be doing, as I mentioned, is finalizing our equity framework and engagement plan. We're so close to being there. And so next we'll be initiating work on project evaluation criteria and metrics. And again, the engagement plan will be a key part of informing that. In January, we're gonna have our first phase of community engagement, and that will look like we're working closely with Erin on an open house, and then also on a couple listening sessions where we're working closely with community-based organizations to make sure that we get the word out and get folks already interested in attending some of those events. In early 2022, we'll be reviewing and discussing the project evaluation criteria and metrics. And all along the way, we're going to be doing community group presentations as requested. So if you know of any stakeholder group in the area that might be interested in a briefing or presentation, please don't hesitate to reach out. So that is all I've got. I'm going to pass it along to Erin.
Thanks, Fabiola. I did want to jump back. We have a slide for next steps. We haven't talked about some of our accomplishments, and I wanted to highlight one of those for all of you, which was that towards the end of last month, we convened a group of city and partner agency outreach, engagement, and equity staff, and brought those folks together to talk about our plans for this project and find out opportunities for us to coordinate and collaborate with each other and maybe work through some existing engagement processes that are happening at the cities. And so I thought that was a really productive meeting, and we identified the right staff to talk to, which was really helpful going forward. So we're looking forward to continuing those relationships with your staff as we move forward with the process. As Fabiola mentioned, we will be having an online open house. We think it will be active early in January. We're targeting January 7th. And so that's something that we'll be sharing out through all of our various channels as that's open, and then convening some listening sessions with targeted community members to be able to do that work. And then the other thing I wanted to clarify is that when we hired Espousal, we knew that we were going to be working on Mstip at the same time as we were working on implementing HB 2001 middle housing. And so Espousal is doing both of those for us. And we see a lot of synergy around the conversations that we're having with the community relating to transportation and relating to housing. It's kind of some of those big picture conversations about what makes a great community. And so we're really excited about the opportunity to have some of those big conversations going forward. So with that, let's go to the next slide. This is our last presentation slide. So as I said, there's a memo in your packet that has more information and detailed summaries of the WCCC member and city council briefings. This is something that we were asked to provide, and we were waiting until we finished with our last city council briefing in mid-November before we prepared it for you. So we'd already talked about some of the high-level lessons learned. We heard really clear support for moving forward and continuing our great city-county partnership on the Mstip program. A lot of support for the Opportunity Fund. We heard that earlier today as well. We've heard support for continuing the geographic balance of the program overall. That's something that's been really important to all of you and our partners. We heard support for helping our engagement through city staff and through community committees. And so, as I said, that's something we've been working through. And then we've already taken care of updating the system of countywide interest map. And I know there's a lot of interest in continuing that conversation as well. We've also clearly heard through these conversations that there are so many needs in our system. And in particular, we've heard a lot of concern about needs for sidewalk infill and pedestrian crossings, and then improving our existing roads up to urban standards, because we still have many roads out there that are primarily rural in character, even though they're now in the urban area and they're serving urban traffic. So at a high level, that's a summary of what we've heard, and there's more detail in your packet. Next slide. So some high level questions here, but of course, Fabiola and I are open to any questions that you may have for us. So if there's any questions about the WCCC member and city council briefing summary, we're happy to entertain those. Do you support us moving forward with finishing the development of our equity framework and our next steps for development of our public engagement plan? And then we've talked before about stakeholder groups that we should be scheduling presentations for. We've already done some of these. We, for example, were at the Beaverton Bike Committee last week. So we're looking forward to scheduling more of those. You don't have to answer this one right now, but if you want to send us an email or have your staff email us, we're looking forward to getting those on the calendar as well. So with that, I'll open it up for questions.
Okay, Mayor Schneider's first up.
Yeah, and Aaron, I thank you for the presentation, and I don't want to belabor this point, but we've provided a lot of input already. I think you're probably inputted out from some entities, including mine, and so I would just my only comment will be to try to ask you the group to take the feedback that's been provided by jurisdictions like Tigard and Beaverton around some of this, and actually not just listen to it, but make appropriate changes accordingly.
Thank you. And we're never inputted out. We're always happy to hear more.
Mayor Callaway.
Aaron, I am so glad to hear you say that right before I speak. Thank you. Under the measures of success, which mentions number of registrations and participants for events, will you also be kind of drilling down to see how many of these are new participants or registrants as opposed to those who always participate? Because that to me is kind of a key indicator. Secondly, all of our communities, in Hillsborough especially, we're always trying to figure out how to reach new communities, within our city. And if there are some strategies that you and Fabiola come up with, we would love to hear them so that we could replicate them in our cities too, and just do a better job with reaching all of our communities, if that makes sense. And then lastly, is there going to be a way that we learn where the target communities travel daily so that we're kind of tracking, within the transportation piece of this, where people are traveling, just so that the plan is able to reflect that?
Yeah, thank you. I think that last point is really interesting and something that we're really trying to get a handle on. We shared the slide earlier that had a little snapshot of our equity index tool. One of the benefits of using a map-based tool like that is that we're not only getting at the demographics of where people live, but we're showing some of those key locations that people really need to travel to. So places like grocery stores, major employment centers, major transit stops. And so I think it really helps to inform that piece of information. We are unfortunately somewhat lacking in travel diary survey data for Washington County. And so it's sometimes difficult to get a handle on where people are going. And so we're trying to use those key destinations as a proxy, but we'll keep working on trying to answer that question. And then as far as sharing out our lessons learned and how we're developing these community relationships and doing this outreach, we will be preparing a final summary, looking at doing that next fall and sharing that out with everyone as well. So if we find that some tools are particularly successful, we will definitely be sharing those and hoping to be able to continue using them as we go forward.
Mayor Beatty.
I just want to say, thank you for coming to our city council. We're pretty opinionated about transportation, and I know you guys took a lot of notes from our meeting, and thank you for going to our bicycle advisory committee. And I just want to take a stab at answering your questions. Like, of course, we should move forward equity framework and the next steps in our public outreach plan. I think we gave you a short list. Our staff is really smart about where to go. We're doing a ton of equity and outreach ourselves. And so I would just encourage you guys to work as closely with you can with city and county and metro staff to make sure that we're not duplicating work. If some group is out there asking people transportation questions, can we like double up on top of that? And it might mean like our staff is asking your questions or you guys ask our questions, but I think the working smarter, not harder approach. And our community is surveyed a lot, especially here in Beaverton. We ask them opinions all the time. So I want to echo Mayor Snyder's comments of like, I hope you take these and we actually start implementing them, because our community gets sick of telling us what they want, with us not actually doing what they've asked us to do. So thank you for the hard work. Mayors often get these multiple presentations, but I know our council was excited to hear it as well.
Thank you, Mayor Beatty. And I know that Beaverton does have some pretty exciting transportation related surveys coming up in January and February. So we had a really good conversation with your staff about ways that we can partner on that so that we're not asking the community the same questions in slightly different ways a week apart from each other.
Mayor Mays.
Thanks, Jeff. Just wanted to throw out the desire to reinstate the option whenever engineering is complete and projects are ready to, in theory, to go, to have the bonding of projects in the future. I am very concerned, in this next round, we have a Brookman Road that needs a half street improvement. What's to the county 5-lane road, so 3 lanes. If without this process, I don't know if we'll be able to get that. We're going to get that built anytime soon, and the nature of what's going on down there, it's just going to make it a mess if we aren't able to use that tool, which I think is an important tool for members in our county, for cities in our county.
Thank you, Mayor Mays. I'll echo what the others have said. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for the work. Thank you for coming to our council. Thank you for taking our poignant feedback. I did have a new question. What is the definition of successful engagement? Considering we have north of 600,000 citizens in the county, is it 1%, 5%, 10%? And obviously the diversity point of it, but how many people are we really trying to reach?
I appreciate that question, and that's, if it's okay, I'll take a note of that, and I'll be able to get back to you with a more specific answer, or at least those goals. Something that I will mention is that, and I appreciated the comment that was made about being able to capture first-time folks that are showing up for the first time. And I think one of the goals that we have is to look at the breadth of reach, but also looking at some of those unique engagements where folks just generally are not showing up to provide input. And so we're working with the community-based organizations and through relationships and the trust that the community has with certain groups to be able to get folks to show up and share their input, and that hopefully will, once we're able to get that information and synthesize it, I really hope that that you all will see value in that. But of course, we'll be looking at the breadth and the numbers, and be able to contextualize it as well. And as you're saying, looking in the region, what are some of the numbers, and who were we able to reach? So definitely we'll be taking that into consideration as we think about how we want to frame the report out.
Thank you. Stephen, you had your hand raised?
Yeah, I just wanted to build a little bit on what Fabiola just said. That was a great answer, and I think our objective is always to try to reach more people than we have before. And I would just say in the last couple rounds of MSTIP, we more than maybe almost tripled the number of comments and responses that we received in the 3E program over the 3D program, which was an improvement on the 3C program. And So not just a quantitative element, right? But as Fabiola was just saying, are we really reaching out to people who haven't been engaged in the past and really broadening the engagement that we're getting is really in my mind, that would be almost the more important one, but certainly increasing the number is also very important to us as well.
Yeah, because all of us, every mayor can tell you, we have those people that are frequent participants, right? That we see at everything, that are always there, that are always participating. So we need to reach out beyond those handful.
Agreed. Yep. Thank you.
Great. Do we have any other, that takes us on to MPAC agenda, I think is where we're at next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. MPAC was held a week ago, Wednesday. We were concerned primarily during the meeting about the regional transportation plan in relationship to the I-205 tolling. We had a number of public comments from the public, relating to the tolling project and to congestion pricing. And the same information that we had basically is, I think, coming before JPAC. I don't want to steal any of Mayor Callaway's thunder, but that was the primary discussion that was we centered on as far as impact was concerned. Again, tolling, moving forward on that, need for clarity on the purpose of the tolling. I heard two comments. One, is it to raise revenue or is it to manage demand, or a combination thereof? And we're still trying to figure out that answer, not us, but those that are dealing with it, ODOT and Metro and other concerned agencies. So that's where we left it at MPAC as we broke for the holidays.
Unmute myself. Any questions or comments for Mayor Truax? Okay. Well, that would take us over to JPAC. Mayor Callaway.
Right. Thank you, and thank you, Mayor Truax. So the only thing I'd add, regarding, the impact information, there were over 450 comments that were received, but only 7 of them specifically addressed the RTP amendment. All the rest of them said, basically, we don't like tolling. And so, the public comment specifically related to, that item, was fairly narrow. But we will continue to discuss this both at MPAC and JPAC prior to votes being taken in January. That is probably the main thing that we'll be looking at. We're also going to be looking at, Sunrise, the Sunrise Community Visioning Project, as well as looking at the I-5 Boone Bridge. Those of you who, will often remember Tim Knapp speaking of the Boone Bridge. And, so basically what this would do would add a couple of auxiliary lanes, which then basically mean that we don't have all the issues related to merging and then exiting, for folks that they can basically just get on and then get right off. So I think, so that's pretty much what we are going to be focusing on in our last meeting of 2021. And I will also just invite Chris Deffebach if there's anything, or Commissioner Fye, if there's anything else either one of them would like to add, to that. I welcome your input and comments.
Well, I will defer to Commissioner Fye for jumping in. Anything she wants to say?
No.
No.
Sorry, my kid has the iPad on. Go ahead, Chris.
No, I was going to defer to you, but I think you covered it. I think the letter to the Oregon Transportation Commission about regional priorities will be an important part of the agenda on the JPAC, and that we'll see if everyone's in agreement.
Chris, to Steve's point about the 91, 92 pages of feedback. I want my homework credit. I read all that feedback. And then I challenged my son because I apparently was feeling like I had to share. I asked him to go through and tally it, much like Steve was talking about. And really what he found was that there was 12 people in some form of support, 187 people against. And as Steve characterized, and I think we need to, I don't think we want to, it's like Mayor Beatty said, right? The constituency is concerned about us not hearing them, right? And when 15 times as many people respond, we have a concern about tolling as people that respond in support of something. Maybe we should listen. And I distilled some commonalities in there, right? The local impact, right? What does it mean in that area to have that local impact for folks that there is no other way to get in and out of their community? What is the tolling going to be, right? Do you pay once a day? Do you pay every time you go by it? And then about the proximity of it. So I think, and the total question of how else would we pay for it, right? It's a financially constrained project. How else would we pay for it if we don't pay for tolling?
Yeah.
So I think that's an interesting bit of, and then he basically counted up 127 comments that he was, I don't know what they're talking about, Dad. They aren't for, they aren't against. I don't know where they're complaining about other things. So Mayor Schneider, you had a question or comment?
Well, just a comment, and I've made this comment at the Region 1 Act, and I'll make it here too, just since we're having this conversation, that I've communicated pretty clearly to the ODOT staff, and Matt, I'm not sure you want to hear this, but I basically said that I think that the overall approach and plan is and will continue to be wildly unpopular unless ODOT recognizes that there's a massive communication task and challenge here that I don't think they recognize, and hiding, maybe hiding is not the right word, but taking the approach that, well, the legislature said this is how it's going to be, when the result is going to be all out mutiny, potentially. Like, it kind of doesn't matter what the legislature said. Ultimately, if there's just, a wild, large revolt, it won't matter. And from a communication perspective, I think that's really crucial. And I've made that comment, and I've indicated, I used an interesting analogy that I felt like they were planning to, like, their approach to the communication and the seriousness with which this was taking place was akin to them planning to invade the country of Iraq using the Tigard High School band kids as their, how they're going to approach it. And that's literally how under-resourced, under-recognized, and under-planned I think this is. And I just wanted to put it in some plain words for them so they could maybe understand just how planned out, like, just everything. So I don't know, I'll be quiet now, but I think that's important.
Thank you, Mayor Schneider. Commissioner Rosenthal.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to support a lot of what the mayor said and the comments, of course, reported on MPAC. And I think I have to confirm, and I know that I don't want to speak for Councilor Gonzalez or Councilor Lewis particularly, but there is a concern, I think, and then we feel it at Metro as well, that ODOT has not been, shall we say, completely as proactive as they should be, let's put it that way, in answering some of the questions such as which tolling will be for which and how long will the tolling be, and providing some of these details in a proactive manner. So there is a concern at Metro as well that they speak in generalities when people are opposed to specifics. And so I think that there's work that has to be done in that regard. So I just want to say that I agree with what the mayors have said in this particular forum, and I appreciate it.
Matt, do you got those errors pulled out of you? You want to talk for a sec?
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge, thank you for the comments. As this group knows, the tolling program is part of our urban mobility office. So not trying to punt everything over to them, but I do want to recognize that they are in the middle of all this. I will take your comments. I know they've heard them elsewhere, but I will take your comments to them as well, so that they're hearing loud and clear what some of the concerns are of this group. So thank you for that today.
Mayor Mays.
Just to be, I don't know, Liticomic, where one might suggest, why do we need to worry about tolling or implement tolling if there's not going to be cars in the future? Since there's not going to be parking in the future, and all jobs will be local to where they live. I'm just being a snot, but that's all I got to say.
Well, and I mean, I think part of it, you know, is what we're really trying to address is, I mean, the infrastructure, right? There is the entire, how do you keep this up? We are continuing to move freight. Even if everybody parked their car and rode the bus to work, the freight still has to get somewhere, right? The groceries don't magically teleport onto the shelf by themselves. Everything that we build and make in this region does not leave the area by teleportation either. So we still got to get all the freight in and out, and you are going to still have people driving some form of transportation. That's just going to happen, right? You still want to go to grandma's house and she may not live down the street. So I think we got to be realistic about that. And I think one of them, Matt, if you don't hear it again, I'll say it one more time. What is the toll amount? I mean, if we don't even have a ballpark, I've heard some wildly astronomical numbers. If we have anything, I think the sooner we get that number out, or how it might look, if we have any idea, that might help people understand whether they're freaking out, man, or not.
Good point. Yes. I haven't heard any numbers either. And I can see that's certainly going to be the biggest question everybody wants to know, I guess, right after. Do we need tolling? And then if so, what's it going to be? So, yes.
Okay. I think everybody's gotten plenty of feedback for taking to MPAC, JPAC, back to the regional mobility group. Future agendas. So, Chris, do you want to talk about the track changes version of the letter?
I will jump into that. Yes, we got good comments from the edits to the letter that you asked to be put together to summarize your comments on the scoping work plan for engagement and approach for the 2023 Regional Transportation Plan update. And we used your your comments to put together a letter, got some thoughtful comments in response, and have included that in your packet under the track changes and the clean version. So what we'd be looking for is there anything more you want to add to this letter? Remember, it's just input into the scoping process, which is important. And we had some extra time, so we just brought it back to you and see if there's anything else you want to say, or if it's good, we can get Chair Delane to sign it.
I don't see any overwhelming. I see a couple thumbs up, but nobody's diving on this grenade. So
Sign
Chris,
it.
maybe, yes, Mayor Schneider.
I was just going to say, sign it.
Okay. All right, kick it
Chris,
out.
if you reach out to Debbie at the City of Cornelius, she'll send you my digital signature.
Okay.
That might be helpful for you.
It might be helpful. I was going to ask you about that.
Can I send something to Debbie to get your signature for my checks too?
No money for you. I would remiss if I didn't stop us for a second to acknowledge a change in leadership that's going to be happening. Mayor Gibson, is this your last meeting with the Washington County Coordinating Committee?
Well, technically, if the next meeting is on the 10th, this is not.
Never mind, moving on.
I'll squeeze in one more meeting. But, you know, I could probably get my arm twisted for Jamie to just go ahead and cover that meeting, and I can make this my last meeting. But my official last day is probably going to be January 19th.
Okay.
And Pete claps to that. Okay. Any other things that we need to address for the good of the order?
I was going to remind you all that we're now into the regional flexible fund allocation process, and your staff will be busy working on grants to submit. And just to remind you that this will, in terms of the future agenda items, this will come back to you. And I think it's the July, August time period where you will have the opportunity to prioritize the grants from that you, and to submit that to Metro, and then JPAC takes action in September. So this will come back to you at a couple of times. I just want to remind you, as your staff's working on it, that you'll see this again.
Thanks, Chris. Commissioner Rosenthal.
Just to remind people that, of course, the grant submittal period for the public share for the parks grants is open right now as well. So that's something that the parks departments, those of you that have parks departments, should be working on. And so that, I think the deadline is like the 22nd of January.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you for the reminder on that. I would ask folks to draw attention to the third page of our agenda brief. It does have all the proposed meetings for next year. Those who are involved in NLC and other groups like that, could you please peruse that and see if there's any significant adjustments or recommendations you have to that date plan for next year? Send those back to Chris, not to me. Send those back to Chris and Steve.
And I would just ask folks, we have our sort of parking lot of potential future topics. If there are any topics there that folks don't see that you're interested in, let Chris or myself know, and we'll be happy to plop those into the list and see when the appropriate time is.
Yeah. Just a reminder, when we used to meet in person, we used to be able to bring the Impact JPAC work programs to you as handouts, but we're sort of off cycle now. So if we can catch up on those, that'd be another thing we would make available to you, so you all know kind of in advance when some of the big regional issues are coming forward.
Well, as bad as I've been the previous couple months, I would be happy if there's no other topics to retire us 5-6 minutes before the hour ends. What I heard was thumbs up for motion to adjourn. All in favor, aye? That's unanimous. Chris, Steve, another good meeting. Thank you very much for your support. Thank you everyone for your attention. Happy holidays. See you next month.
Thank you all.
Well, Steve, that almost went like we knew what we were doing.
Well, yeah, except for that bumpy start. We'll try to chase down what happened with the agenda. I looked at the link appears correct.